Question 48 of the Summa Theologica begins a new two-question treatise. It is called the Treatise on the Distinction of Good and Evil. The Treatise on the Distinction of Good and Evil. And St. Thomas Aquinas is going to spend 6 articles in this question, really investigating the nature of evil. And this particular question, 48, is the distinction of things in particular. It's interesting that he doesn't mention in this question the word evil, because every single article in this question is going to have to do with evil in some way or another. And I know in my many years, over 20 years of working in Catholic ministry, that one of the most perplexing questions that people have, especially atheists, they want to know, how can we reconcile a good God with the existence of evil? Because we may not be able to see God, which we've talked about previously, but we can certainly see evil. We see the effects of evil all the time in our culture. In fact, I would say that is probably the number one reason why people choose, and I use that word very deliberately, choose to be atheists, is that they just can't reconcile a good God, as St. Thomas Aquinas describes, and all the evil all around. And so this is an important question. If this is something that you struggle with as we go through this, I think St. Thomas Aquinas has a pretty good answer for it. It's also going to come back up again when we talk about passions a while from now, because there is a passion of love and there's a passion of hatred, and St. Thomas Aquinas will talk about the relationship between these two. I also want to warn you that some of the images that I use in this particular presentation might be a little bit creepy for some people's tastes, like this one, so I wouldn't be watching this with your 2-year-old kid on the lap or anything like that. But again, it's not like awfully, crazy, horrible, but there are some pictures. Some of the pictures are a little bit creepy, like this one right here. Article number 1 says whether evil is a nature. So right here, St. Thomas Aquinas is trying to kind of figure out, like, if we have this great God and he created a good world and everything that has being is good, how do we make sense of evil? How did evil creep its way in, and does it have a nature of its own? What exactly is evil, and how do we square this with a good, perfect, infinite, eternal God? He says, one opposite is known through the other as darkness is known through light. Hence also, what evil is must be known from the nature of good. Okay, so it's going to be only in comparison with the good. That's the first thing he wants to get across. Now, we have said above that good is everything appetible or desirable, and thus, since every nature desires its own being and its own perfection, it must be said also that the being and the perfection of any nature is good. Okay, so here's that classic St. Thomas Aquinas optimism coming out. But within that optimism, he has to make, some explanation for all the evil that is hard to ignore in the world, right? Hence, it cannot be that evil signifies being or any form of nature. Therefore, it must be that by the name of evil is signified the absence of good. And this is what is meant by saying that evil is neither a being nor a good, for since being as such is good, the absence of one implies the absence of another. So you have to go back to one of the early questions of the Summa, where St. Thomas Aquinas says, what's the difference between being and goodness? And he essentially says there's not much of a difference. If something exists, it's good. So we know that there is an existence of evil in the world because we read newspapers and watch, look on websites and see news. Well, so what St. Thomas Aquinas is saying is it's just the absence of good. It's not its own being. It doesn't have its own nature. It's just an absence of something, all right? It's a deficiency of the good. All right, so Article 2 says whether evil is found in things. Okay, so like this guy here looks kind of creepy, looks kind of evil. Is he evil? Is evil found in these things? Thomas says, the perfection of the universe requires that there should be inequality in things so that every grade of goodness may be realized. Just as a point here before we get on to St. Thomas Aquinas' explanation, if you think about it, the reason we walk outside one day and say, wow, what a beautiful day, is that we have something to compare it to. We've seen awful days. We've seen bad weather. And so the good, whether by comparison, or maybe we have a good friend, but we've had bad friends. And so if there was nothing to compare it to, if there was no gradation, no inequality, there would be no basis for comparison. Now, one grade of goodness is that of the good which cannot fail. Another grade of goodness is that of the good which can fail in goodness, and this grade is to be found in existence itself. Okay, so he's going to come down and say that, yes, evil can be found in things, and that's because of the inequality which is essential in order for us to be able to experience good. There has to be some things that fail. For some things there are which cannot lose their existence as incorruptible things, while some there are which can lose it, and these things are corruptible. Okay, so he's making a distinction here. As therefore the perfection of the universe requires that there should not be only beings incorruptible, but also corruptible beings, so the perfection of the universe requires that there should be some which can fail in goodness, and thence it follows that sometimes they do fail. Now it is this that evil consists, namely in the fact that a thing fails in goodness. Okay, so he's starting to kind of hone in now a little bit more on what exactly is evil, and this is when something fails in goodness, and he's going to make some distinctions here as well. Hence it is clear that evil is found in things as corruption. It also is found, for corruption itself is an evil. Okay, remember, death is an evil. Death is corruption of the body. That is an evil. It wasn't in the original plan, right? This is something that came about because of sin. Article 3, whether evil is in good as in its subject. Is evil in good as in its subject? Evil imports the absence of good, which we've already explained, but not every absence of good is evil. For absence of good can be taken in privative and negative sense. Absence of good taken negatively is not evil. Otherwise, and I love this, it would follow that what does not exist is evil. Okay, so maybe you're a young person and one day you're going to have a child. That child doesn't exist yet. Does that mean that child is evil because it doesn't exist yet? That's what Thomas is saying. Or a tree that's going to grow next week as a bud, is it evil because it doesn't exist? Okay, and also that everything would be evil, though not having the good belonging to something else. For instance, a man would be evil who had not the swiftness of a roe or the strength of a lion, but the absence of good, taken in the privative sense, is an evil. As, for instance, the privation of sight is called blindness. So just because I'm not as strong as a lion, that doesn't make me evil. It's just that I don't have that, right? So that's what he's saying. Now, the subject of privation and of form is one and the same. That is, being in potentiality. Whether it is being in absolute potentiality is primary matter, which we learned about a couple days ago, which is the subject of the substantial form and of privation of the opposite form, or whether it be being in relative potentiality and absolute actuality. Now, this is kind of confusing stuff, I admit. As in the case of a transparent body, which is the subject both of darkness and light. It is, however, manifest that the form which makes a thing actual is a perfection and a good, and thus every actual being is good. Okay, anything that exists is good. We've already explained that. You've got to get that into your mind, and you got to understand that, and that changes, as I've said a few times, the way you will see the world. But again, Thomas is not looking at this through rose-colored glasses and saying there's no evil in the world. He's just saying it's the privation of good, right? Okay, for as it has being and potentiality, so has it goodness and potentiality. Therefore, the subject of evil is good. Okay, last part of that was a little bit confusing, but hopefully you're getting the gist of this. I think this is, this first pass through the Summa as we go through this. If you just get most of it, you're above above most people. The very fact that you're watching these videos, says a lot. So that's awesome. Okay, so now this one in Article 4, he says, does evil corrupt the whole good? Okay, so like when we sin, are we utterly corrupt? Or when there's some evil that manifests itself in something, does that mean it's just utterly corruptible? Thomas is going to say no to that. He says evil cannot wholly consume good. To prove this, we must consider that good is threefold. One kind of good is wholly destroyed by evil, and this is the good opposed to evil, as light is wholly destroyed by darkness and sight by blindness. Another kind of good is neither wholly destroyed nor diminished by evil, and that is the good which is the subject of evil. For by darkness the substance of the air is not injured. Okay, isn't that interesting? So it becomes dark, but the substance of the air is not injured. Okay, it's not affected. It's a little deep, but and there's also a kind of good which is diminished by evil, but is not wholly taken away. And this good is the aptitude of a subject to some actuality. Okay, so then he goes on, and I'm not going to read all of this. He says, nevertheless, it is not wholly taken away, because its root always remains, which is the substance of the subject. Thus, if opaque bodies were interposed to infinity between the sun and the air, the aptitude of the air to light would be infinitely diminished, but still it would never be wholly removed, while the air remained, which is in the very nature is transparent. So he's saying that you can't entirely take away the essence of goodness, although it can be diminished. I think that's what he's getting at here, although it is a little bit confusing. Likewise, addition in sin can be made to infinitude, whereas the aptitude of the soul to grace is more and more lessened, and these sins indeed are like obstacles interposed between us and God. Our sins have divided between us and God. All right, but this goes back to a very classic Protestant versus Catholic debate, is that are we totally depraved? Okay, if you know about the tulip that many Calvinists believe, and some Presbyterians, tulip, the T stands for total depravity. That means that we are totally depraved because of sin, because of our first parent's sin and also our own sin. We're totally depraved. The Catholics don't believe that. We believe that we hold on to some essential goodness, although we are wounded by sin. It's a very, very fundamental difference, because we maintain our essential goodness, and I think this is what St. Thomas is getting at here. Number 5, whether evil is adequately divided into pain and fault. All right, he says, evil, as it was said above, is the privation of good, which chiefly and of itself consists in perfection and act. Act, however, is twofold, first and second. The first act is the form and integrity of a thing, okay, what it is. Okay, we are human beings. That is who we are. That is our essence, right? The second act is the operation. Okay, so we act, we do things. So keep that in mind. Therefore, evil is also twofold. In one way, it occurs by the subtraction of the form or any part required for the integrity of the thing. Okay, where it's something is taken away from it due to punishment or corruption or something like that. As blindness is an evil, as also it is an evil to be wanting in any member of the body. In another way, evil exists by the withdrawal of the due operation, either because it does not exist or because it has not its due mode and order. Okay, so St. Thomas Aquinas in a second here is going to relate this to free will. Through our operation, we can do bad things, right? We can make bad decisions. But because good in itself is the object of the will, evil, which is the privation of good, is found in a special way in rational creatures which have a will. Okay, that's you and me. Therefore, the evil which comes from the withdrawal of the form and integrity of the thing has the nature of a pain, and especially so on supposition that all things are subject to divine providence and justice, as was shown above. Okay, I love how he says as was shown above, because he makes a reference to question 22. Here we are in question 48 of the Summa, and he's going back and he's saying, remember what I taught 20 questions ago? And so that's why it's so important to kind of read these in order. Okay, so the evil of pain is going to be punishment. It's taking something away from us. Okay, for it is of the very nature of a pain to be against the will, right? But the evil which consists in the subtraction of the due operation in voluntary things has the nature of a fault. For this is imputed to anyone as to a fault, to fail as regards perfect action, of which he is the master by the will. Therefore, every evil in voluntary things is to be looked upon as a pain or a fault. So, what do we get out of this? The pain is the punishment, the hurt, the things that the way we're punished. The fault is when through our will we choose what is wrong. Okay, that is fault. The pain is the punishment. All right. So the last article in this question says whether pain has the nature of an evil more than fault has. So what's more evil, the punishment or the fault? That's what he's saying here. And he says fault has the nature of an evil more than pain has, not only more than pain of sense, consisting in the privation of corporeal goods, which kind of pain appeals to most men, but also more than any kind of pain, thus taking pain in the most general meaning so as to include privation of grace or glory. So when grace is removed through mortal sin, that's a pain. Or when we suffer a temporal pain, like punishment, like a child getting spanked or something like that, that would be literally a pain. There is a twofold reason for this. The first is that one becomes evil by the evil of fault and not by the evil of pain. To be punished is not an evil, but it is an evil to be made worthy of punishment. And that's Dionysius, a quote from him. And this is because, since good absolutely considered consists in act and not in potentiality, and the ultimate act is operation, or to use something possessed, it follows that the absolute good of man consists in a good operation. We are inherently good, but we are also good by the fact that we abide by a good will. We make good decisions. We act according to our conscience and virtue, right? That's a good operation. Okay. Now we use all things by the act of the will. Hence, from a good will which makes a man use well what he has, man is called good, and from a bad will, he is called bad. For a man who has a bad will can use ill even the good he has, as when a grammarian of his will speaks incorrectly. Therefore, because the fault itself consists in the disordered act of the will, and the pain consists in the privation of something used by the will, fault has more of evil in it than pain has. All right, so the fact that God withdraws something from us because of our sin, like he punishes us, or we end up in hell, or we have grace removed through mortal sin, that's not as bad as what causes it, right? What causes it is that we fall into sin, a misuse of our will, and that is the evil of fault. And that is what St. Thomas Aquinas is getting at here. All right, that was a lot there, and we have one more question in this treatise on the distinction of good and evil. He's going to talk about tomorrow, what is the cause of evil? Where does evil come from, right? And so this will bring us to an end of question 48 of Prima Pars of the Summa Theologia. Thank you so much for watching. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you.